humans act. They act with intention.
Maybe this
bigotry has a cost in the market.
This distorts the market. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. Bigotry has a cost in the market, right? Like, so I'm developing a sociological theory called cultural cost theory. Where I basically combine sociology and economics to create a new sociological
I love that
lens.
you're doing that. Just shout out to you. No, seriously, I think it's really cool that you're doing that.
I don't know when I'm ever like, it's like my baby. So like, I don't know. I want to release it, but I never feel ready to. I'll put on my David Friedman hat, right? Because David Friedman claims to be an ANCAP. He's not. In the case of slavery in the Americas is, you make an interesting point because it's special, right? American slavery is something like the world has never seen before or after. You know what I mean? We had less than 4% of the transatlantic slave trade, and yet our slave trade became within the states larger than the entirety of the transatlantic slave trade. How? Because we bred them intentionally, like cattle, in a way that, well, I say them. I mean, I know you're black, you know what I mean? Well, you're Haitian, aren't you? Haitian,
yeah, it's not me, yeah.
So it's not what we were doing. I mean, you guys were just getting killed, right? It was just like, work them till they die. And then, what it was a boomer talking about what they did to pay their way through undergrad and college and rent an apartment. And then what they did is they did the math, and I checked his math, and it was correct, right? To understand that he was making just above minimum, like basically right at minimum wage, and paid his way through college, paid off all his undergrad in college, rented an apartment on his own, and then, graduated with a degree with no student loan debt. And so when we adjust that for inflation, especially looking at student loan inflation, in order for someone to do that today, minimum wage would need to be $126 an hour.
Wow. Yeah, I thought this was a really good conversation. I actually did want to hear at some point, Scott, here, because you were saying there was like an argument built on a few premises, and you're like, later on, if you want to hear about them, hit me up. Do you remember which one we were talking about? I think it was started with the minimum wage, maybe, or something. What I'm talking about?
Oh yeah. Oh, so praxeology. It might be a little bit too much to get into. You could do a study on prices and changes in Atlantis on like potatoes, right? But you couldn't actually establish what that means going forward. You've only established a historical fact about like what occurred in that time. That's the basic concept of like the denial of empiricism. And it pisses the fuck out of fucking economists because they're like, no, fuck you. We have all these economic models. We can prove all these things, right? And it's like, I have no problem using that as an attempt to understand the future, right? But the thing is that price is price is subjective, right? How much are you willing to pay for a hot dog, right? Well, in value is subjective. Price isn't subjective, right? But the capitalist determines price, and they're basically making
to make
a guess.
the hot dog, Scott. That's the cost of the hot dog.
The labor theory of value, yeah, right? Like so fucking stupid.
Yeah. It takes
but
8
like
hours. That's a very expensive hot dog.
Right. So, I mean, and so you need land, labor, and capital, right? And the capitalist is, the one we don't live in an evenly rotating economy. So, the capitalist is awarded the one that brings capital, not the land or the labor, but the capital investment. Well, why do you need capital? Well, you need capital because people prefer things now as opposed to preferring things later. It's known as universal time preference, right? So if I'm hungry for a pizza, I don't want to wait for someone to build a factory that makes frozen pizzas, right? I want a frozen pizza. And so I'm going to go to the grocery store and buy a frozen pizza. And then when I'm hungry, I'm going to fucking throw one in the oven, right? Well, the capitalist makes a bet about people's future desires. And so properly allocating resources, that is what profit is. It is the interest paid for the upfront capital, right? Which is, I bought a factory, I manufactured things, I spent the money so that we could have frozen pizzas at the grocery aisle, right? And it is the prediction of how much how much should they cost, and how many pizzas do people want. So that's where you get profit from. That is the award of profit. And so understanding all of that, understanding those mechanics, are the kind of the key elements. And so philosophically, you start with the only axiom that is necessary for praxeology or Austrian economics, which is a theory of human action, which is to say that humans act. They act with intention. So you can choose between option B, you can choose between option A and B, right? And the theory, the axiom is that humans do choose between option A and option B. And that even an inaction and a refusal to choose between A and B is a conscious decision. It is a choice in and of itself. And so if you accept that, right, which is to say you're not a hard determinist that believes that humans don't have free will and that humans don't act according to choice, but instead they're pre-programmed to do everything, and all of history is already, there is no morality because you can't make moral decisions because you don't actually make decisions. You just move based upon genetics and environment, etc. So if you accept that humans act, okay, once you accept the fact that humans act, you can move pretty quickly to, I wonder if I wrote it down because it might be easier to do it if I wrote it down here. Doesn't look like I did write it down. So humans act, and then you move into subjectivism, which I kind of already, so then you move to the fact that humans have value things, and that value is subjective. I'm skipping a couple steps, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Which is to say, like the hot dog thing, right? So like, how much is a hot dog worth to you right now? How much would you pay for a hot dog? Well, what happens in 2 hours if you haven't eaten? You get hungrier. Well, you might be willing to pay more money for a hot dog, right? And so the value, your value, how much you value something is not a constant variable. The Marxists will claim that that value is constant and that it's based upon the labor that's put into something. It's nonsense. We have values. Then we recognize that man orders his values in order of importance. So if I have $10, right, and I can buy a t-shirt or I can buy a hot dog, right, and both are $6, right, some people are going to go, well, I'm going to buy the t-shirt. Fuck it, I'll get home. I'll eat when I get home. And some people are going to buy the hot dog because they're fucking hungry and they don't care about the t-shirt. So man orders those subjective values. So there are things that he prefers, and then he chooses the things that he prefers. So you basically walk through this system. You walk through an understanding of subjective preferences, of higher order values. Then you move into supply and demand equation, right? And you can ground supply and demand as buyers in a market and sellers in a market and people choosing what to do, et cetera, et cetera. And what you eventually will get to is that you will get to an understanding of minimum wage. You'll understand that minimum wage is a price floor, which is to say, when looking at a supply and demand equation, so if we look at it like this, I'll draw it because it's probably way easier. I can't tell. Hopefully this isn't backwards, right? So you can see
it will be backwards. Yeah.
Okay, hold on. God damn it. All right, hold on.
I hope you practice mirror writing.
Yeah, I did. Okay, so this circled thing, you're in the show, everyone can see and hear. What the fuck? Okay, thank you. Fucking whatever.
Show starts now.
Right. So this is a supply and demand equation, right? So where these two things intersect is price. Like this is what we call price. Okay. So if I move this thing, right, this right here, if I move this,
the supply curve
over,
or the,
it doesn't actually matter for the example. We can call it either one. I can't see the mirrored image, so it's kind of hard for me to conceptualize which one it is. If we move this over, it changes this. Right. Or sorry, it's hard to do this. It changes where the price is. Right. Yeah. So it changes the intersection. So if you reduce supply, for example, then a product becomes more scarce. It's more valuable. If there's 1,000 tacos available versus 100 tacos available, right? What occurs is that in order for the capitalist to make the most money, in order for the people to make the most profit, they're going to increase the price of the tacos, right? Because there's only 100 available, assuming the exact same amount of people that want to buy tacos.
Yeah.
The capitalist is doing their best that they can to make the most money, which means they're trying to get this equilibrium between supply and demand. Now, what has occurred when the government creates minimum wage is there's a price for labor. And then they draw a line here and says price can't go below this line. So now what you have is a disequilibrium between the supply and demand equation, which is to say the supply and demand equation intersect for whatever this job is, right? Obviously, like, fat cat at Wall Street's way up here. That's a different job in terms of supply and demand. But for like Walmart greeter, for example, right? They're below that price floor, which is to say there's a whole lot of people that are available to be a Walmart greeter, right? And the company doesn't make a whole lot of money off of Walmart greeters, right? Like they're there mostly to make people feel friendly, but let's be honest, the real reason they're there is for stop loss, right? Like they're there to deal with stolen products, and that could change, et cetera, right? So when the government says, well, it must be, it has to be above this. Well, what Walmart does is they're now forced to pay they need Walmart greeters. So one of two things happens. One, they find different machine or AI or technology-based solutions to fire Walmart greeters. Because now if they pay the Walmart greeters, let's say $25 an hour, right? Well, they're losing money by having Walmart greeters because they're not losing $25. Like the amount of theft, the amount of value of that person is not worth $25 an hour. So they'll fire the Walmart greeter and they'll come up with a technological solution. So what does this do? Well, this gets rid of jobs and it further increases the incentive to, automate jobs and get rid of them. Or, right, what they'll do is Walmart has a fuck ton of money. And so they'll just pay Walmart greeters the $25 because they need to. They don't want to come up with a solution. They'll eat the loss.
But other
right?
smaller employers won't.
Right. Other people won't be able to afford similar jobs. And so at a certain point, some jobs get pulled out of the market. Some jobs that were worth $15 an hour aren't worth $25 an hour. Okay. So then what happens is the currency and the market has to get back to equilibrium. You can't have the supply and demand equation not matching, right? Like it doesn't work. The companies can't make a profit. Businesses can't make a profit. Employees can't make appropriate amounts, but they're making too much money, right? Which is, you might say morally that's one thing, but they're making too much money in terms of what their labor is valued at. So as things get priced out of the market, what happens is that you have more people that need jobs because some people lose their jobs. So more people need jobs. And so what ends up happening is that the jobs that are still worth $25 an hour become more competitive. And so if I'm working in a warehouse, right? And let's say I'm the warehouse worker and I make $10 an hour and minimum wage goes up to $20 an hour. Well, I just got 100% raise by the government. I now make $20 an hour. But the person that was making, let's say, $25 an hour, that was like the head of the entire warehouse, they're not going to get a raise to $50 an hour, especially if the company is taking a short-term cut in order to do that. So the middle class employees, not the poor, end up taking a pay cut in the immediate in order to give a pay raise to the poor. It's not the wealthy that lose money. It's the middle class that end up balancing out with the poor, and the poor becomes a larger category as the middle class get pushed down. Over time, the equilibrium has to match. And so what happens is the value of a dollar decreases because the value of labor never changed. In fact, because some people lost jobs and the market's more competitive, there's actually more people that want those jobs. And so those jobs are actually even less competitive which means that the value of the labor actually went down. That means that they're making less money. Now, literally, they're making more dollars. They went from 10 to 20 or whatever. They're making more dollars at those minimum wage jobs. But the actual value of what they do for the company didn't change. And so when they have more money in their pockets, what happens? Well, the first thing is that the company has to figure out how to deal with keeping their warehouse workers and not losing money. So they raise prices. Let's say I'm a distributor of 7-Up Canada Dry, right? And I sell soda. Well, in order to make up for the minimum wage increase, right, I have to come up with more money somewhere or I have to fire people and lose property. I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise prices. Sodas become more important. So immediately products go up in cost. And what you see is things at the grocery store get more expensive. As that occurs, other things in the market get more expensive because they have to balance in terms of relative value. If your grocery bill is usually $100 a week and your rent is usually $800 a week, well, your landlord also buys groceries. And in the market, your rent is worth roughly 8 times more than your grocery bill. But if all of these suppliers increase it, and there's a 50% increase at the grocery store, all of a sudden, your rent is now only worth 6 times your grocery bill, except your landlord also buys groceries. And so what ends up happening is your $800 a month rent goes up to $1,200 in order to compensate. Goes up to $1,000 in order to compensate, etc. And the market eventually balances out. And what ends up happening is that minimum wage becomes a temporary solution that allows the poor a small window of opportunity to escape poverty or to pay off debt, etc. Inflation, the middle class, end up being pushed further down so that the poor and the middle class's wages get closer and closer together, whilst the rich do not have actual money in the bank. Instead, the rich finance everything off of debt. They get loans from banks. And what they do with these loans from banks is that they have an interest rate. And that interest rate was a guess that the bank made based off of the interest rate of the dollar and the profit that they wanted. So the more that inflation hits, the less interest in real money the super mega wealthy and billionaires have to pay because they have actual assets, and those assets go up, especially when you look at quantitative easing. Those actual assets go up, and the amount of money that they have to pay back on interest on bank loans, which is how they have their actual money. Like Elon Musk doesn't have any money, right? He buys Twitter with fucking bank loans, and then he gets bank loans based off of the fact that he owns Twitter, right? Like it's not money in the bank from profit that he's sitting on, right? So the super wealthy get more and more wealthy when middle class hit, when we have inflation, and the creation of minimum wage laws and increased minimum wage laws, all it does is give temporary solutions to the poor. It incentivizes the capitalists to invest in automation because automation now is a cheaper solution. It pushes the middle class's wages down and crunches the poor and the middle class together, and it makes the wealthy more wealthy.
Okay,
Wow.
so
I've had this discussion before with Scott, although I do have some responses. But yeah, I gotta go to bed.
Okay,
Yeah,
have a good one, buddy.
Take care. Be well. Always a pleasure.
So yeah,
of course.
I
went for a super long time, so please.
Yeah, and this is not like a panel, so if people want to jump in, it's fine. It's like whatever.
Yeah, I'm just chilling.
But so I disagree with you on that final part on automation. I think
I can explain it better if you want me to.
I think employers are always incentivized to go for automation, to reduce costs.
Yes,
if that's an option,
What I'm saying is that inflation increases that rate, especially minimum wage. Minimum wage increases that rate, right? So, like, let's say, for example, I'm McDonald's CEO, right? And I I can have 4 cashiers making a certain amount of money, right? Or I can have 2 cashiers and 2 automated systems installed where people can order, right? So I can fire some. But when I do the math, what I realize is that the automated system costs this amount of money and the employee costs, so automated system costs A and unautomated system unautomated, which is employers, is B, right? So before the minimum wage kicks in, B, right, is more expensive than, it's cheaper than A. That's why I don't install automated systems, because it's cheaper as it exists. The moment there's a big difference in their wages before inflation and before the price equilibrium goes back. Remember how I said in that there's that immediate kind of like breath of fresh air that the poor get because all of a sudden their wages go up by a big chunk, right? Well, the market hasn't equalized yet. During that time that the market hasn't equalized yet, the price of automation is still the same because the market hasn't equalized, but the price of the employees increases. So the best time to invest in automation to make the most money is when minimum wage laws kick in. If I'm using this to replace minimum wage workers, because it's now more profitable and incentivized for me to get rid of those workers now and get automation as soon as possible before inflation kicks in and it becomes cheaper again to have those employees.
So I hear you, and I thank you for explaining everything. I think you did a fantastic job explaining your position here. But the part that I'm a little confused over, lactoid, and you all address it. It's like, where does the value of the worker come in? So you guys aren't familiar with the theory of value, and I understand why you have disagreements. But
it's that supply and demand equation.
Yes, the supply. You would say the supply and demand equation. But if okay, I'm just trying to figure out the best way to present this. So I am a worker, right? I work for Scott here, and I make widgets. Widgets, their price was $100, but because of market forces, whatever you like, they fall into $50, right? But I'm still putting the same amount of time in to making those widgets. So is it simply you would say that despite that, like my labor is always worth less, and society should have no consideration otherwise?
What I would say is this: all other things being equal, right? So we're assuming that the manufacturing system didn't change, whatever, right? For whatever reason, widgets are half the price that they used to be because widgets are not that valuable. You have a unique skill set, which is the ability to produce widgets. Now, if the value of widgets falls by half, and let's assume you have no other skills, and the only skill you have is the ability to produce widgets, right?
That's a pretty good assumption.
Yeah, of course, right? But we're doing it just to game theory it out, right? Like real economics, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of different pressures here, right? Yeah. The real thing is that I'll explain after this, but I want to do it the simple way first, right? So widgets fall 50%. All things in the factory and manufacturing process are exactly the same, right? The value of your labor has to fall because you have a skill at producing this thing that either too many other people have a skill at producing now because more people have come into the market, or people don't want anymore. People don't want this widget anymore. So, and your skills are designed towards that. Now, granted, in a real economy, if you're a factory worker, right, what ends up happening is that the business owner had, he didn't properly allocate, the factory in some way. The business owner is the one that takes all the risk, not you, because in the real world, you're not the one that actually has widgets only skill. You can actually make all the widgets in factories. You have a general understanding of it. And so the guy who's only producing widget A's at his factory he goes out of business and you just go get a job at another factory because you have widget making skills. It's actually the capitalist that suffers under the system of the dropping of it, because it's the capitalist that takes all of the inherent risk, because the capitalist is the one that invests the capital. They're the one that have to buy the factory. They're the one that makes a bet saying, I bet widgets are $100 now. I bet they're going to be 120 in a couple months. They're so fucking valuable. And they were wrong. Widgets were actually worth 50.
Before I could,
in theory, right? Like we have
Yeah.
we have a socialist economy where like government steps in to save the fucking capitalists and doesn't give a fuck about the workers, etc. Like we have like a whole bunch of problems there. But in like a pure economic model, that's what happens in a free market.
I hear you. And I do want to address that. First, Lactoid, like what are your thoughts on all this? I'm just curious.
So Karl Marx disagreed with all this. You know, he supported the labor theory of value as a scientific institution. But the reality is that a lot of
So
people
is Adam
during
Smith,
his
to be
time,
fair.
yeah, exactly. Adam Smith did a lot of people during his time. He was just this is quite literally just science, like old science. This would be like doctors believing in miasma theory, right?
In the 1840s, it was bad. It was bad then, though. He got called out by all of the economists at the time for having old theories.
We can't hold him, I don't think, to the same standard, though, because my understanding is that if this Marx was before subjective theory of value really got hammered out, really got like fully understood.
No, that was understood at the time. What wasn't understood was marginal utility, right? So that it's fair to say that Marx didn't understand marginal utility, and he didn't understand obviously the economic calculation problem, because that's Mises, right? But he didn't understand Hayek's like the local knowledge problem, right? So marginal utility, Prmecayes, just to for the record, basically, so Aristotle understood marginality. Right. Even Aristotle understood that. Right. Which is when you go to the grocery store and there's a loaf of bread. Right. And it's $1. You might buy a loaf of bread. Right. But you might not buy 2 loaves of bread, because the first loaf of bread is worth more to you than the second loaf of bread. Because the second loaf of bread is like, am I going to eat all this bread? Maybe I have to throw it in my freezer. It takes up freezer space, etc. Right. And so if the store has way too much bread, they might do like a buy one, get one half off. Right. So now you're like, well, I wouldn't buy 2 loaves of bread for $2, but I would buy 2 loaves of bread for $1.50, because the first loaf of bread was worth $1 to me, but the second loaf of bread might be worth 70 cents. And like, that's 20 cents less than what I'm willing to pay. Obviously you don't do the math in your head, like of like the exact penny amount of what you'd be willing to spend, but it is proven that that's a thing. So marginality is something we've known, and Marx should have foreseen in his bad economic theories anyways. But marginal utility is something that we didn't quite understand until later. And the marginal revolution in economics changes a lot of things. So for example, when you are let's go back to McDonald's. I'm a janitor at McDonald's. Now, there are 5 jobs, and let's assume that it takes a janitor to do these 5 jobs, right? Like, let's just assume a janitor can't do all 5 jobs. It requires 1 janitor for each job. And the 5 jobs are clean the bathrooms, take out the trash, mop the floors, clean the tables, and then the last one is like scrape gum off the bottom of the tables.
I knew it was gonna be. I was gonna suggest that one too. Yeah.
Right.
Awful. Yeah.
Right. So the first janitor I hire, I only have 1 janitor. So what that means is I have, out of these 5 things, I have to pick 1 thing for them to do and ignore the other 4. Well, what I know is that the most valuable thing is that I clean the bathrooms. If the bathrooms are disgusting and have shit everywhere, people will refuse to eat at my restaurant. So that's the most valuable job that the janitor does. Now, the second janitor, presumably, and the third and the fourth and the fifth, presumably have the same skills as the first janitor. They have roughly the same skills. They all have the ability to clean. But each time I hire a new janitor, the value of the janitor goes down, because I assign the first available employee to the task that nets me the most profit. And each successive employee is doing something that is less valuable to me. And so what we understand with marginal utility, which this completely destroys the labor theory of value, no matter which, even if it's Das Kapital 1 or Das Kapital 3, whichever version you have, is completely destroyed by the marginal revolution. And this is in the fucking 1800s, mind you. But like, but the thing is that like each janitor, so the more you hire an employee, the more jobs you have available, and the more you're hiring similar people to do similar jobs, the less valuable those jobs actually are in a business, in an entity for the employer. Oh, bye, Ollie. Right? So that is kind of like an important aspect to understanding. It's also one of the reasons why large companies, it's one of many reasons why large companies tend to have employees paid at lower wages than, let's say, small companies. Because small companies have an employee that does a diverse set of tasks, and they do the most valuable tasks. Whereas at big companies, all of the valuable tasks are already taken care of, and it's the minute tasks. But because they're big, they can afford an employee to do like just this one task. The small clothing store has a lady that does all of the cleaning, whereas Walmart can hire a fucking idiot to like sweep, right? And so that job is worth way less than the clothing store. Even though they're kind of doing the same job, they're not doing the same job. And marginal utility is part of that.
I think the lesson is just like labor doesn't have value. The only thing that has value are goods and services.
Well, labor has value.
Not in of itself.
Yeah, no. There's no such thing as a unit of labor, right? Like you can't pick labor off a labor tree, right? Like this is a unit. This is pens, right? Like this is a good, as Lactoid is saying, right? So 1 million pens, these are units. They're measurable units. People measure labor by hours, but like as Sisyphus, shows, right? Like that doesn't make any sense, right? Like if you're like, and then the commies will say, well, the labor has to be meaningful labor. And it's like, cool. Who defines fucking meaningful, right? Like the process is still the same, right? That like, you can be doing labor poorly, and you can be doing labor in a highly skilled way. And skilled labor is going to be more value than poor labor, even in the same job and position, right? Like a master electrician, his labor is more valuable than a journeyman electrician, because a master electrician can get done in 4 hours and without hurting his back and without hurting his knees, that a journeyman electrician is breaking his fucking body running around trying to get done, because the master electrician has been doing it for 25 years. He knows exactly how to get the job done. So his labor is more valuable than would be the journeyman electrician, right?
Do you want to respond to that, Lactoid, or?
I don't know if it was a disagreement. I just think that like
yeah, it was like a linguistic thing. I wanted to explain it better.
It's a linguistic thing, but I actually like. It's been something I'm trying to focus on more, is because when you talk about someone's labor being more valuable, that seems to imply that there's something intrinsic about the person that is valuable. Mm-hmm. When I think that that's like the wrong emphasis. The only thing that has value is goods and services, and so your labor is like in of itself has no value. It's just what kind of services and what kind of goods are you producing, and like those things have value, and you are in possession of those things that you can trade with other people.
Yeah. And so an employment contract isn't actually selling your labor, because labor doesn't exist. Labor is an abstract thought that we put in a box. So when you do an employment contract, what you're actually doing is you're saying, I agree to do whatever it is that you tell me, and I have these skills. Do you want to utilize these skills? I agree to do whatever it is that you tell me within this domain of our contract, and you agree to give me monies. The thing that's being traded is the monies. The labor, as you would, are the stipulations in the contract. These are the things that you do to get the actual tangible asset. So you're fulfilling your contract in order to get money. The actual thing that is changing hands is not labor. The thing that's changing hands is whatever currency you're using to purchase something. But you're not actually purchasing labor. What you're really doing is you're writing up a consensual contract between two people that says, "Hey, I need a bunch of things done. Will you do them? If you do them, I'll give you this actual thing if you help me."
It's an interesting way of looking at it.
It's super autistic, I get it, but that's how economics has to be sometimes.
No, I hear you. I hear you. So I won't pretend that like I understand like the leftist like critique of this, right? Like I'm not gonna go down that route. Like
Well,
in
it
terms
depends
of
on what
like
you mean by
strictly
leftist. Yeah.
fair enough. But like strictly from the economic standpoint. But I guess I guess this is like the difference between people who look at things in terms of market terms, and then those who look at things from societal terms. Like uh, uh, earlier in the stream, you talked about like what you felt was like the heart of like leftist politics, right? Like the prime
Political
axiom.
philosophy, right?
Yeah,
Not leftist philosophy, but leftist political philosophy. What I think the biggest difference between the left and the right, and I mean the real right, I don't mean like the Republicans, right?
Yeah.
I say the real right is much, much smaller than the political right in most
Fair enough.
countries. I would say the real right is like maybe 10% or less. And then you have people with
Let's just
right-wing
break that down.
moral values that that align with the right.
Gotta put up my
But so
camps. Go ahead.
yeah, so stop. So re-education. I get it. So like the main thing that the left is that the left it's really like it really boils down as far as I see it, right? I could be wrong. You know what I mean? Like I consider myself pretty decent in political philosophy, but you know, fair enough. The real difference is that the left believes that human beings are malleable, that all problems that we have can be controlled for with the right push and pull mechanism, and that you should do that, right?
Yeah.
So poverty, it's like, well, why does poverty exist, right? And they say, well, we can fix poverty. All we need to do to fix poverty is re-engineer people in some regard. So, you know, schools, education, maybe take money from the wealthy and give it to the impoverished, and they'll fix it themselves, etc. Right? And the right, they're kind of like their prime axiom is in a way a refutation of this, which is that people are not ultimately malleable, that people that systems can't be done in that regard. Yeah. Distributus has a wonderful video, and it's you should absolutely check it out. I think it's the best fucking video. I'm about to throw it in chat. I'm looking for it. YouTube. It's a really long watch, but I'm telling you, it's worth it.
I'm fine for that.
Distributus, I think it's 9 values, conservative. To be right wing and 9 points. Yeah. So this is, bitch. I don't want to try fucking. What is it?
YouTube TV or something.
Yeah, dude. Right? Like they're fucking.
Yeah.
Let me see if I.
all the time.
Yeah. So here it is. It is an hour and 13 minutes. I'm putting in StreamYards. Okay. Sure. It's really, really, really extensive, and I think really, really well done. And his definition of right wing is as such, that there are 9 domains of right wing, and that if you have like the more of these you inherit in your philosophy or in your worldview, the more right wing you are. And that is the strong axiom of human teleology, the axiom of virtue, the collective axiom of human teleology, the entropic law of human nature, right, which is that humans descend towards chaos and need like order. The entropic law of human institutions, same thing with those institutions. The iron law of oligarchy, prioritize human uplift over human comfort, favor investment-oriented accountability systems, and lastly, pursue order-based politics. And I think this is spot fucking on. I think everybody should watch this because it's a much, much better definition of right wing than anything I hear from anybody else.
So, this might not quite apply to what you were saying because you specifically said leftist political philosophy, being what you were trying to address. Um, but the center of my politics, right, can always be boiled down to, and I think you guys would agree after talking to me for so long, is harm reduction, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
That like
that's not politics though. That's your moral value.
exactly. That's why I said like
Yeah.
might not apply. Yeah.
You've seen Sam Height's work on that, right?
Sam Heights.
No, not Sam Height. Sorry, Jonathan Haidt.
Jonathan Haidt. No, I mean I've heard of him, but I don't know. If there's a video, hit me up with the video as well, please.
I'll just show you. I'll just show you what it is real quick because this will show you exactly what you're talking about because a guy already did all of this research, and you're exactly correct. Moral psychology, 5 traits. Height is such a weird way. Here you go.
Okay.
So, it's on the Wikipedia article. Interestingly enough, is the first link I got. Can I share a screen here?
Yeah, try it. And I don't know how to usually do this. Because I usually don't.
Oops, wrong one.
No, was that?
I have a bunch. I have a bunch of tabs. Sorry.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah. All right. Let me add to stage.
Okay. Yeah. So this is his work, and this work that he did, he was able to predict the outcome of the election between Obama and Mitt Romney better than pollsters by simply asking people, by simply getting a demographic representation of a county and asking them about questions about these principles without even fucking asking them who they're going to vote for. So over here on the left, you have the order of values for the left. And then over here, you would have conservatives. So on the left, you have way up high is harm reduction, followed by fairness. And way down at the bottom is authority, in-group, and purity. And as you get closer and closer to the right, what you'll see is that the right wing, they lose harm reduction and they lose purity the more right you go. And the more they value authority, in-group preference, and purity, right? Sacredity, sacredness, etc. And the right tends to balance these 5 values all at the same time. And the left tends to dismiss authority, in-group preference, and purity, throw all that away. It's all about harm reduction and fairness. Whereas the right tends to care about all 5.
Yeah. Huh. I guess you've said that before, and I guess I like push back on whether they actually feel like in terms of like the outcomes of their politics, whether it's actually true they care about all 5. I definitely agree that they care about authority, in group, and impurity, 100%. But harm
conservatives
and fairness.
Conservatives obviously care about fairness. Like they're bitching about it all the time, and they mean it.
Yeah, okay, but this not sorry. I did. That's not where I want to go with this. But like,
actually, harm reduction is conservatives' number 1 value. By the way, that's their highest value. It's harm reduction.
Yeah,
it's just balanced by other values.
Yeah. So anyway, what I want to say is that because like my focus is harm reduction. Because I don't look at things through a market first perspective. I'm not sure if that's fair to you, but like that's like I don't do that.
Yeah, it's not the first way that I look at things. It's just a lens I use.
Okay. That like I want a society where people aren't destitute. And I don't particularly care how we go about that. As long as we aren't causing, I guess, like in the hunt for a better society, we aren't harming others in some irreparable way. And I don't think taxation is stuff, so let's leave that alone.
No, it's fine.
But
like I'm not gonna.
Because of that,
yeah.
Well, hold on. Let me finish my point. So, like, the problem that I'm looking to solve here is that
Hmm.
people are working themselves to death just to earn a living. So if we
Agreed.
either
Agreed. I
we
want to
don't
stop
have a
that too.
minimum
Yeah.
wage or we don't have a minimum wage that's high enough or whatever the case may be, and people don't have enough to meet their basic needs, and they're are working multiple jobs and they still don't have enough either to keep themselves like housed or just to
Hmm.
have like some sort of basic level of human flourishment. That's a problem for me, and I want to solve
Yeah.
that.
No, I agree.
And
I
so,
agree. Obviously not the
and
minimum wage part, but I
sure,
agree.
sure, sure, sure. But that's the thing. Like if once you like drill down, do I care about using the mechanism of the minimum wage to accomplish this? I don't. Actually, I don't care.
I.
So I can hold on,
Mm,
just let me get that.
yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
So I can jettison that completely. I could just throw that away if I have another solution. So if that solution is a universal minimum wage, right? Like from the government, basically, right? It pays all citizens a certain amount, and that, like, combined with whatever wage they do earn, like purely
Mhm.
from market forces, if that accomplishes my political goal, then that's fine. Like
I don't think
that
it
works
does.
for me.
I think so. Like if
I'm
even
sure.
as I'll put on my David Friedman hat, right? Because David Friedman claims to be an ANCAP. He's not. Go fuck yourself, Friedmanites. But he's a
I'll be
consequentialist.
right back. I really got to pee.
Sure, sure.
He's a consequentialist, right? Um, and so the thing is you say, well, how do I put this? So I watched this interesting video and I checked up on the math and it was correct, right? But this was like a couple weeks ago. I saw it like on like a YouTube short and I was like, there's no way. So I did the math and I was like, oh shit, he's not wrong, right? And what it was is it was a boomer talking about what they did to pay their way through undergrad and college and rent an apartment. And then what they did is they did the math and I checked his math and it was correct, right? To understand that he was making just above minimum, like basically right at minimum wage, and paid his way through college, paid off all his undergrad in college, rented an apartment on his own, and then graduated with a degree with no student loan debt. And so when we adjust that for inflation, especially looking at student loan inflation, in order for someone to do that today, minimum wage would need to be $126 an hour.
Wow. Wow.
Right. And so it's like, if I take you at the word of consequential analysis, raising the minimum wage doesn't fix the problems that have occurred. What has occurred is inflation in our currency. It is a theft. It is a hidden taxation, the worst kind, because it is, as Sprout has put, like that taxation without representation, taxation on our children and our children's children, is that we have gone from a nation that under Clinton administration had zero fucking debt basically. And we now have $32 trillion in debt. Our unfunded entitlements and entitlements and spending, Medicare, Medicaid, and then of course there's all these other agreements out in fucking la la land, like UN agreements and NATO, et cetera, right? When you look at all of these things, they account for well over 85% of our entire budget. So when Republicans and Democrats are talking about tax cuts or tax increases or budget cuts, they're talking about 15% of the budget. The other 85, and that's including like the other 85% of the fucking budget is already like we don't get to do anything about. It's Social Security, that's Medicare, that's Medicaid. CBO put out before COVID that we were set to be $120 trillion in debt by 2050. And that was before Donald Trump and Biden both ballooned the fucking debt with COVID fucking surplus checks, and which was, measly little checks to little people and then bailing out the airline industry and all these other fucking companies again. Right. And so it's like, I'm with, in my heart, right. I want to do whatever it takes. And sometimes I'm even in my heart, like I feel that pull to like violate rules or whatever to make things better for people. I agree with you. In my heart, right? Like in my mind, I know that that's wrong. I know what it leads to, and so I won't accept it. But I feel that pull too. And the problem is that minimum wage increases is a lie that has been sold to us that seems like it works, but it does that's not going to solve this problem. Not when our currency is ballooned to such a degree where we can't do what our grandparents did. $126. That's the minimum wage law we would need in order to do what those boomers did. That'd break the economy. U.S. economy would collapse if it was a federally illegal. It would be all black market shit.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, like.
But that's what we need to go back to what the boomers had.
Yeah, but I mean, like, but you already know that the way I tackle these things is different from the way you tackle them. The fact that that student loans would still be a thing is a difference between you and I, right? You know that already. That
I'm not against student loans existing. The first thing
I know, I'm saying I am. Like, I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying I would institute a program of to be college free. That's a worthy investment into our children, into our populace.
It's a terrible idea.
To become that workforce used in your factories to, well, not in your factories, but like in the C-suite of your factories to run things. Right? That's a worthwhile investment within our country.
Do you believe that? Do you really believe that? I'm just curious. Like, do you genuinely believe? Not educating people. Educating people is a very different thing than the government backing the current education model, right? Because I'll tell you this: my great grandmother, she went to college, right? Right? She went to college post, just a little after World War II. Now, when she went to college, she had to prove that she was fluent in Latin in order to even get looked at by the college. The education has clearly become less valuable as more people have gone into it. People are working at fucking, the conservative meme, working at Starbucks with a sociology degree. But I mean, it is true that there are tons of people with degrees that they said were gonna work, that were gonna get them money, and they're not worth anything.
I 100%. I agree with your critique there in general, that there should be different paths open to people. We shouldn't just be encouraging. The Black community knows exactly what you're talking about. Where we have all these individuals, especially Black women, who've been educated, did the thing that they were told to do, and aren't seeing the results. So I hear you, right? So trade schools should be a thing, and we should. Certainly, jobs below a certain level that don't require a degree, that should be on the fucking resume. Like what are you doing? Like, I'm there'd be a lot of reforms I think you and I could agree on. But part of those reforms would be saying, hey, we're going to invest in people, and so like you can go to college or trade school. So they say, hey, we're going to get you a trade so that you can go and be a productive member of society afterwards. Right, that gets you those skills. That's a valuable thing to our society to do. So I would institute that.
So this is where the economics is again, like, why it's such a good lens, and I'm so glad that you like walked through that with me, right? Because this is where we start talking about that supply and demand again, and value, right? This is really, really important. Is that things that we believe to be inherently valuable is your individual belief as a person. You have, remember I said some people will buy the t-shirt, some people will buy the hot dog.
Yeah.
Right. And so the market is made up of 350 million in America, right? But obviously the market's more complex because there's trade and et cetera. You know what I mean? But like the market is made up of, 7 billion people, et cetera. It's made up of a whole bunch of actors that all have different values. And the way that, so this is known as Hayek's local knowledge problem, is that, which then becomes, Mises then makes it the economic calculation problem, which is that the central planner has an idea of what things are, what the value of something is, right? But how do they determine that? Well, what they do is they spend money to do studies, right? To gain information on the market. And so when you spend money to gain information, you that money's gone. And then what you do is you have to gain more and more information. Whereas the market that uses price is made up of millions and billions of data points, right? So for example, I want to build a train and I'm going to build train tracks from city A to city B. I can go around the mountain or I can go through the mountain. In order to go through the mountain, I need I need to hire additional engineers and explosive experts and like people to build a
More
tunnel.
time to dig, all that stuff. Yeah.
Right, but to go around the mountain, right? Let's say it takes the same amount of time. I need more iron. I need more track, right? And let's assume for whatever reason that both are going to be equally valuable, right? Well, the central planner, the socialists, the nationalists, right? They say whatever it is might be, right? The fascists, the communists, whatever, right? The statists, they say
They're all the same. I know. Yeah.
well, in this instance, they're all the same because they're all central planners trying to centrally plan the economy. They say, ooh, which is better? I'm going to do a study to determine what is better. And I'm going to try and get some information to determine what is better. And then we're going to make a decision based off of that information. And that information that could be right, it could be wrong, etc. But in a capitalist system, price is what controls this. Price has all of the information already baked into the equation. You see, when I have to hire an engineer to do this, and then I have to look at the price of iron, I can make that decision because the engineers are cheaper. Why are the engineers cheaper? Because the engineers aren't needed elsewhere. They're not as valuable. There's a supply and demand equation. There's more engineers than we need, than we currently need. So therefore, engineers don't cost $200,000. They cost $80,000. Or maybe it's the other way around. And there's an agricultural revolution. And engineers are needed everywhere to build irrigation systems and farms and whatever. And so engineers are actually really expensive. And so the government, so what I can do is I can go, oh, the engineers cost too much. I'm going to use the extra iron. And it's millions and billions of interactions like that that determines price, which it's impossible for central planners that think something is valuable to be able to do it as efficiently as the market does it. And college loans and student loans and education is one of many such examples.
So, hon, I'm gonna, because I have a definite response to that, but like, Lactoid, do you feel the same way that like, price like has baked in everything, and that like if we use that as our guiding star, I'm sure like we can I can come up with some like examples of the margins that might change things, but we're gonna use that as our basic guiding star. That'll lead us to the best outcomes.
Um,
It isn't exactly my argument, but fair enough.
yeah, I'm a little bit confused then. So price
My
in
argument
terms
isn't that
of-
my argument is that price has information that is infinitely more valuable about the value of the general value of things than is possible for central planned government agencies in order for them to determine the value of things. When something has price, it has the price of iron. It has the price of how much it costs to hire someone to mine iron. It has the price of the equipment. It has all of these things, and it has the price of everybody else that wants iron because there's a supply and demand equation. And the commissar, he doesn't know, does the train, because if he makes the decision to use iron instead of the engineers, what if he's wrong? What if iron is desperately needed elsewhere? Whereas price has that thing. It lets us know how valuable something generally is. It is extremely superior to what the market is capable of doing. I'm not saying that's our guiding principle for what we should or ought to do, because the capitalist is making a bet on the future, right? They're allocating resources based off of what they think will be in the future. But the capitalist has way more information available to them than the central planner. And the central planner has to spend money in order to obtain information. They have to spend resources in order to determine something that already exists in the market, which is price.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think oh shit, I think everything there is right. So empirically, this is also true, right? Like command economies tend to have
Mhm.
shortages for this very reason, because you have, some basically command economy is just like some guys,
Communists don't starve their people on purpose usually. I mean, they do if they're kulaks, but like for
sometimes,
sometimes they do, right? But a lot of times this is just what happens when you try and
Right.
take over a functioning economy and then you try to centrally plan what was a somewhat market-based economy. Because you have
Right, 'cause-
shortages, you put things
because
in
the
the wrong,
idea
you put resources
it's
in the
not
wrong place.
reactive. It's by definition
Mhm.
not going to be reactive. It's going to be prescriptive. So you have
Mhm.
basically some guys sitting around in like a room who say, you know what? I think it'd make more sense to grow some more wheat. We're all on board. Yeah, we're all on board. Okay. And so then they grow a bunch of wheat, but like uh, the actual desire for wheat is going to be baked into the price because it's baked into the demand. And if there's too
Mhm.
much wheat, then the price is going to go down, making wheat more accessible, et cetera, et cetera. I think these are
Exactly.
all truths.
But it's
The
not just
only
wheat,
issue
it's
is
the farmers,
anything.
everything.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
hundreds of different
All the
economic
components,
interactions.
all the
Yeah.
components of the economy, right? The only, obviously, the big issues come when you have a deception, right? Because the reason why deception like fucks up the whole system is because it throws off what price is supposed to communicate, right?
That's
Ideally,
a
price is supposed to communicate something about the quality of wheat or like the necessity of wheat. But if I'm
mhm.
selling you like paper that looks like wheat, it's not going to actually reflect the price of wheat because it's not wheat, right? Like I just totally fuck you over.
fraud. Yeah. I mean, that's fraud in that
Yeah.
example. But
Yeah.
yeah, so what you're talking about is in economic theory is known as a negative externality. And the specific negative externality that you're discussing is known as an information failure, right? Is that I'm working off of faulty information, right? So this is true of this is a problem that that people try to pretend like only exists in capitalism, that like the information failure is like this thing that happens in capitalism but doesn't happen in a command economy. And like to an extent, like definitionally they're correct, but there are all a host of other things that are problematic too. And so the thing is that this is part of the guess that I'm talking about, right? Because we don't live in an evenly rotating economy. Is that the biggest information failure is what is the demand for my widgets going to be in the future when I'm going to sell them? That's the real information failure, right? Um, yes, fraud occurs. It's aggression. It's anti-capitalist. But of course, pragmatically, it exists. But the same thing is true of the socialist system. You know, thievery exists within a socialist system. You know, I mean, you look at you look at USSR or any of these places, and you'll see, fat cats siphoning money. That in this supposedly communist country, you have these dudes that are fucking own yachts and shit, right? So it's like there are all kinds of problems, and the same thing is true of like the other thing too is unintended consequences. I know Prmecayes, you've heard me mention this multiple times in stream, is that when you centrally plan things, you make these blanket rules for the entire economy as opposed to individual choices by individual capitalists. What you end up having is unintended consequences that can have severe damage on your economy because you didn't realize that was a really bad problem. Whereas those things are distributed amongst the 1,000 individuals, and it's the dumb individuals that do the bad things, and therefore their businesses fail and they get gobbled up by the smart people that foresaw the unintended consequences in the market. So the incentive structure is against those consequences in the market, and it's not true in a centrally planned economy.
Um, there's I don't know. There's a lot of things I want to react to because you guys said a lot of interesting things. Um,
Yeah. I love talking econ. I don't get a lot of opportunity to do it usually because people are too
yeah.
bombastic and they get mad when I start dropping terms they don't understand. And then they get even madder when I'm like, let me explain it to you. It's going to take 5 minutes. And they're like, fuck you. And I'm like, well, you don't get it. So I don't know what to tell you. Like,
Well, no, it's just good when we
not
can
you.
talk
I'm just
about.
saying in general. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I know. I'm just saying it's good sometimes when we can talk, not in a panel, so we don't have to worry about time and not the other people wanting to get in and stuff.
Yeah. But
But
to summarize with the student loans, right? And, like that is kind of the problem. You said minimum wage is a mechanism, student loans. Again, when you say free college, it's the same thing. It's that like the central planner is lacking all of the information about which degrees and which type of education and what is efficient and what's not efficient out of the situation in terms of education. And you're shotgun blasting things that cost a lot of fucking money in a system that's being corrupted and bloated by government money and is ballooning. The cost of education is extremely high. And it's because the government guarantees all of this fucking money to all of these institutions.
Yeah, but like if the government was the sole or not the sole, excuse me, but just like the major source of their money. Right now it isn't. It's like through those private loans. But if it was that, right, then you can make demands on
Private
those
loans.
as to
Hold on, that is the government. That's
I know,
fascism.
I know. Yeah,
It's
I know.
fascism because the government is
backed by the
demanding
government.
that these businesses, right, it backs it and it demands that these businesses not turn people down for it. And so what that means is that these businesses actually don't exist in a market at all. The government forces them to do it, and then they pretend like it's private. And that's what you had under Nazi Germany.
And I don't support those loans at all, right? So I'm talking about wiping them off the map. But anyway, we can make demands that the colleges be more efficient. And
Efficient by whose resources? Is the hot dog more valuable or the t-shirt more valuable? Which one? For everyone.
More efficient. Maybe is not the word that I'm looking for. That prices are ballooning for a number of reasons. It might be staffing. It's definitely them building things like constantly, right? And the hopes of attracting more students. There
are obvious problems you can fix. Like I'm with you. Like there are easy solutions, but ultimately, right? The problem is what's more valuable, the hot dog or the t-shirt? And the answer is neither. But you say I have an answer.
But hold on. What is the question you think I'm answering here?
You believe that a college education that you have deemed like in your mind's eye, right? Like you have an idea of like a basic college education. You believe that is more valuable than the individual choices that taxpayers would engage in. Because I'm a blue collar worker that didn't go to college, right? And if we do free college for all these other kids, right? A chunk of my paycheck is going to be taken away from me to give to these kids to go to college, right? And so what you believe is you say the t-shirt is more valuable than the hot dog. Because I, the blue collar guy, I wanted the hot dog. I wanted to spend my money on what I wanted. I wanted a bigger house, which meant I was going to hire more construction workers and employ more construction. I was going to hire more electricians. I was going to, hire more coal miners. I was going to hire all of the people that are more painters and paint manufacturers, all of the things that are involved in the production of a house. That's what I was going to do with my money. That's the hot dog. And then you said, no. All of that economic activity in construction and blue collar jobs and trade labor and mining of materials and resources and paint and new housing. And that new housing means lower rent and mortgages across the United States of America, which means poor people have more access to housing. All of that, the hot dog, is less valuable than Susie's gender studies, women's studies degree. Obviously, I'm taking two extremes, right?
I know what you're doing.
But this is the point of price, is that we tend to think of it as like one thing. Oh, I'm just taxing this guy. But it's actually millions of economic interactions that we've taken out of the market because we value this other thing that we don't actually know the value of. Neither does the capitalist, right? But the capitalist has price, which is way better than the central planner. And that's the problem, is that you can't actually measure what was lost when you tax that money. You can say, well, look, we spent all this money on education, and these people that got educated, they made 15% more money than they were making. But you can't actually measure how much money was taken from the truck driver that would have bought a new house and how many blue collar jobs existed and all those. You can't measure any of that. That was stolen from the economy.
Yeah, but you also aren't measuring like the economic value created by having education, whether through college or through trade schools or through any other paths that we open up, right? And there are other ways to do this than just trade school.
But Price does.
Like, yeah, so that there's an economic uh, uh like there's a positive economic impact of having these people educated, being able to go into the market to be useful and not having a massive debt, right? Yeah, they can invest, they can do those.
I agree. I agree. The problem is what here's what I'm saying. There's a positive economic impact to the hot dog. There's a positive economic impact to the t-shirt. You're saying, I prefer as an individual,
Call it a glizzy
I believe
from now on.
Right. I believe the t-shirt has a better positive impact. But the thing is that what ends up happening is that that's only true for you and your opinion. And there's billions of interactions that are left out, and you're not measuring the lost positive impact of the hot dog. You're just saying, look at the positive impact of the t-shirt. They both have positive impacts, and you don't know what they are. You only know one of them.
The capitalist isn't doing that either, right?
They don't have to.
The capitalist is because they have price, right? But price isn't the only consideration. Like,
no, of course, their desires.
I'm sure. Yeah, but there's also a social impact and human being and just like a whole list of these things that matter as well.
Do those things have value?
Yes, but I'm not sure. I don't think they necessarily.
Does social well-being have value?
Yes, value to me. Sure.
So if things have value and people have an order of values, right? Hot dog or t-shirt, or maybe it's 100 different things, right?
Sure.
If there are people that value that more than they value the other things, why would they not pay for it?
If they can't pay for it, if they don't have the money to pay for it, because we don't have minimum wage, we don't have a universal, like a governmental minimum wage, because can't have that either, right? We have capitalists who say they'll pay me exactly the worth of my labor, right? In terms of like the price of the goods, right? But sometimes they don't.
So you just admitted that they don't value that as their highest thing. If I can't pay for social well-being amorphously, right, because I need to eat, well, I value eating more than that social well-being. It's the internet champagne socialist. It's the internet champagne socialist that sits back and says, I know what you should value.
No,
I know what you should value.
You
should value this
because I'm not saying
more.
Because no, I
value the glizzies. You value
look. I'm saying that you should have the option of being able to eat and go to college, right? That those two things should not be in contention. And if you want to go to another area, that's fine as well. But I know it's not exactly what you meant, right? Because you're saying order of your you should order your priorities, right? So like if you have a certain amount of money and eating is super important to you, that's cool. Clearly you have determined this is the best because of the price, that this is the best course of action. And yeah, but the world that I'm looking for like takes all these other things into account, right? They understand that the world understands that
the central planners, they understand all the things, but the problem is they don't. I get what you're saying.
They don't have to be okay. I'm going to ask you something. Ask both of you, right? What is the value of women raising children?
Well, I mean, value is subjective. So the value, the price of something.
The price. What is the
Well, price is a capitalist's guess, right, at what a product or service is worth, right? What they're willing to pay someone, right? So you might be able to determine the price of a nanny, right, by asking a company like what a nanny is worth, and you might be able to derive some price there. But a nanny isn't exactly the same thing as a mother raising children, right? This is the point: is that price is subjective, value is subjective. It is the central planner that says that we can determine which of these two things is more valuable.
No. But before we get there, right? There is labor being done, right?
For sure.
Labor of child rearing, and it is massive. And in fact, our whole system falls apart if this labor isn't done. It's that critical, right? But that labor isn't being paid. Even despite it being this critical and resulting from a product being children that eventually engage with the economy and keep the nation going. So
yeah, of course.
Should that be paid? Right?
Sorry, no, of course not.
Of course, lactoid. Should that be paid?
Paid by who?
Just before we get there, should it be paid?
Should it be paid? I'm assuming this kid is like their own kid.
Yeah, their own kid that they're raising.
Well, no, it should not be paid.
No.
Okay, so you have a critical good, that's like without this good, everything else falls apart, right? Like
I can explain this way.
Please go ahead.
So, remember how I talked about like the bread and marginal utility or marginality, where like you're willing to pay $1 for the first loaf of bread, and so like you're not really actually the price is what the capitalist sets the bread at, right? So the capitalist says the bread is $1. What you'd actually be willing to pay for a loaf of bread is, let's say, $1.26. So the reason you purchase the bread is, in the moment that you chose to purchase the bread, is that what you were willing to pay for the bread is more than the price of the bread. So you grab the bread, right? If you weren't only willing to pay 85 cents, you would not pay it, obviously, because it's $1, right? Like, it's impossible for you to be unwilling to pay $1 and then simultaneously pay $1. So the difference between the price and what you pay for and what you're willing to actually pay for it versus what you pay for it is what's known as, and it's not just that difference, it's also what it is that you want, the reason you paid for it. Eating the bread, right? Obtaining the bread. This is known as psychic profit. This is psychic profit. I was willing to give up money, which other people value, in exchange for something that I wanted. Okay, so the reason that women raise children is multitudinous, but the main reason, the only real reason that anybody does anything in terms of economic interactions, is to gain psychic profit. This is the same reason that the wage gap exists between men and women. When we say women have, make 73 cents on the dollar for 99 cents, and it's like for $1, and it's like one of the things that immediately changes, that immediately like bumps it closer together, is women choosing professions that deal with people and men choosing professions that deal with things. You see, women are more likely to be teachers, psychologists, counselors, camp counselors, HR represents, because they deal with people. Because women place a value on the feeling of, I'm doing something that helps people. It makes them, they're willing to be paid less money, because when they go home, they go, man, I did something for those damn kids. They feel good giving back to the community for those kids. And therefore, their labor is not as valuable, because they gain something out of that interaction that isn't just money. They gain the satisfaction of being a teacher. The prestige that comes with being a teacher has value to them, to go, I'm a teacher, right? You hear nurses say all the time, nurses save lives, right? And it's like, the ability to say that has value to them in some capacity, right? And so there's all these things that they gain value from. Whereas the guy that works at fucking some no-name tech company in like a basement somewhere under fluorescent lights that slaves away, that makes quadruple her income, but just autistically looks at a fucking screen, he needs to be paid more because he's not getting any fucking satisfaction from his day-to-day job. He's not getting any, he's not like, oh, I'm so happy I did what I did today. Isn't it so great that Uber's code is more secure? Isn't it so great that Uber is more stable? They don't give a fuck.
Engineer, and you get the same level of satisfaction, like
right. Or there's some prestige for working at Google, et cetera, right? So there's all these other things that occur that are beyond just the money that is paid. One of the ultimate forms of psychic profit for women is raising children. The satisfaction of pair bonding with their child, the ability to shape their children, as opposed to going off to work and feeling so sad that they left their kid. I hate that I have to go to this fucking job and I don't get to fucking see my son grow up. I don't get to know him anymore. Like, God, I love him so much. I wish I could get back, which is another reason for the pay gap. Right? Is because women choose to work less hours because they focus more on family, whereas men place less value on family. And so that is, and then also, there's also the investment, which is when you have a child, there's an understanding that in the future, you don't want to be old and alone with nobody to take care of you. And so there is an expectation, essentially a moral duty or obligation of some degree that your offspring, your children, right, will be there for you when you're old, or that they'll give you grandbabies. The thought of having grandbabies, right? All of these things. This is the psychic profit that occurs. They're paid. They are paid. They're already paid. If they weren't paid, they wouldn't do it. They're paid in psychic profit. The idea that like some women bitch about it is entitlement. That's fine. Be entitled, but I'm under no obligation to have my money taken away so that you can do the thing that you want to do. They resent the fact that the economy sucks and they have to go to work. That's what they're really mad about. They resent the fact that they can't stay home because it's super valuable to them, not because it doesn't have value. It's the exact opposite. It's extremely valuable, but they have to eat first. And so they have to go to work and they fucking hate it.
Literally none of that stuff is guaranteed, right?
No, of course, I'm speaking in generalities, right? But
yeah, I know.
They're outliers,
but yeah, I understand. But none of that is guaranteed. This and the nation itself derives value from the creation of its workforce. And without that creation, the nation does not continue. But
I don't understand. What do you mean? You were continuing. My bad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you think that?
Well, just like the nation isn't a, like, I don't know who the nation isn't a person, right? It's like, what is the nation? Like the United States government? The collective of people?
Sure, we'll go with the government. Yeah.
Okay. Right. The government needs tax dollars in order to fund all of its programs and all of its corrupt politicians. So it wants more people working. Okay, go ahead.
Sure. It needs some, and to defend its borders and do all the things that a nation state does, right? And it derives value from that. But and to do that, it has this unpaid workforce that does that thing for them. Whether they get psychic value out of it or not, that work is done. Everything would grind to a halt without it. So, like, to be clear, I'm not like actually taking a stance myself as to whether people
just trying to understand the economic kind of thought about it.
Yeah. But it seems like if there's a critical work being done, a product being produced, and like the market like has nothing to say for this, right? Like
the market does.
Go ahead. How does so explain it? How does the market have anything to say for this? Where the price apparently is zero, when some other doing it for their own child, the price is zero.
Right, but the price isn't zero. It just looks like it's zero because there's no company that hires mothers to take care of their own children. What they do is they hire fathers to work for them. And some men say, I'm going to be a fucking provider and I need to make enough money so that my wife doesn't have to work. That becomes a demand from the labor force that they have to be paid enough money. So it's the men that are, or woman, if it's lesbian, I don't give a fuck, right? Like it's the provider in the family that says, I have to make $120,000. I can't take 110. I can't take 100,000. I have a mortgage to pay. I have this, and my wife stays home with the children, right? And so women make up over 80% of the economic decisions in terms of purchasing of products, goods, and services, right? And so, despite that, we also know that men are making more money than women, right? They work more hours. They make, they have, higher paying jobs, et cetera. One of the reasons that male dominated professions tend to pay more is that male dominated professions tend to have men that are more traditional in a lot of regards. And part of that price of the labor is the fact that women aren't in competition with them in the labor market. See, if a woman stays home with the child, she's not in the labor market, which means she can't compete for my job, which means my job is more valuable and I have a demand of my employer to make more money. But if she goes into the workforce, right, as women have done, what do? You get stagnating wages because you've doubled the amount. Well, it's not women's fault. It's just how it is. Yeah. But it's like if you enter double the people into the labor market, right? Then labor's worth half what it was. So the price is actually baked in to the provider's wages.
I love that you went down that route because that perfectly dovetails with where I want to go with this. So single mothers who don't have that level of support, right? Now, you guys aren't for welfare or anything like that, right? But they are providing a service. They are mothers. They are creating that service. They don't have the male subsidy or whatever. So like, what are we to do? They still have the same costs, maybe even more so, because especially if you're poor, being poor is super expensive. They have a whole list of costs and responsibilities, but they don't get that extra help. Like, why not give them some sort of stipend or whatever, right? Assist them because they're doing something valuable.
Go ahead, do it. Do it with your money. I don't care.
Why not the nation? If they are doing.
So if you read the Bible,
it's all built in within the economy, but there is a hole here, right?
It is all built into the economy, even the single mothers, right? He's laughing at the idea of saying there's a hole here. Even single mothers are
exactly
built
what I
into
was
the
laughing
economy.
at. Yeah,
right.
Single mothers, there's a hole there. Yeah.
There's just a black hole, actually. You know what I mean? They just draw in everything. No, but like so when you read Isaiah, right? I think is when you read Isaiah, right? And especially Amos in the Bible, right? And I know I'm using the Bible as a reference point, but I think it's important because it shows a historical kind of moral condition over time. What you'll see is one of the major reasons why Israel is, a ripe basket of fruit in the sun, right? Which is to say, it looks pretty and all, but it's rotting on the inside, and it's gonna fall to Babylon. Is that they're not taking care of single mothers? Is literally in the Bible. Not taking care of, they say the widows, right? Because the assumption is, of marriage is like a sacred institution, et cetera. Yeah. Like, you don't have no fault divorces back then, right? But like when they say the widows, they're talking about like single moms and like women without a family any longer. And saying that's one of the things they say, like it's a constant reason why God is saying you're breaking your covenant with me to do the right thing, and so you'll be punished. And this is just a statement of reality. A society that doesn't take care of single mothers, for example, is a society that falls apart. And of course, he's also judging them for their hedonism and their worship of sex gods and their lack of fucking gods. Right. Well, the gods that create single mothers, right?
Fair enough.
Right. You get where I'm going, right? And so there's a balance in society. There is a value to society in there not being destitute women on the streets. That value exists, right? And so there are tons of market solutions and charity that is available to these things. But we have a culture now where we no longer feel it's our responsibility to be our brother's keeper or to take care of our community or be involved in our community. Instead, we want the government to fix this. And the thing is that over 50%, possibly 60% of all of your wealth is stolen by the government. It's taken by the government, either in inflation, taxes, you pay your property taxes and your mortgage and, your sales taxes and your luxury taxes and your wage taxes. And don't forget that your employer's paying taxes for your wage taxes.
Conservative thought. Conservative, or I don't know if you would.
I'm not really that
call
conservative.
this conservative thought.
But it's fine.
Sorry. Let's say Republican thought. Let's try to narrow this down. Republican thought for the past few decades, and I guess maybe before, I don't know, but certainly since the Reagan Revolution, is that like independence is freedom, right?
Yes.
And that the government staying out of your affairs is a paramount and like the part of the ultimate expression of liberty.
Mm-hmm.
And saying that like these other interactions are more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So one, your individual interactions in the economy and society, but also your interactions with your community, like your church or whatever, right? Your these charities, all these things are included. These things are more valuable than inherently the bad government and whatever it can provide. Like that is the thought that has been pushing, right? And
right.
To that,
this is why conservatives
to that goal, we degrade the welfare state, right? To say that in the end, charities will take up the slack. But that hasn't been the case, and that will never be the case, especially for a country this large. It just that has not actually borne fruit. I guess it's another distortion in the market. I don't know, but still, we have mothers who are destitute, and then private charities simply cannot fill in that gap. And people are discouraged from giving to those, not just because I guess taxes. They have less money in their pocket because of taxes, but like the thought of having a more individualistic society is what Republicans wanted. They have done the work to make that more of a reality, and this is what you get in that case, right? That people don't take care of themselves. Communities are broken up because those communities are subject to market forces and nothing else, because I guess we can't step in a system. And so if those communities can be broken up because of the market forces, well, then we don't have the people around who might take up the slack, right? Like in so many ways, our social and civic lives have been degraded, and it's because of that level of Republican thought that freedom is independence.
Okay, so I hear you. I hear you. But so I'm showing you this, just U.S. government spending.com, right? So as we can see here, so this is welfare spending, from 1900 to 2024 as a percent GDP, right? So this is inflation adjusted and by nature of being percent GDP adjusted, right? So the idea that Republicans have like decimated or like cut back welfare, it's a push-pull, and it has slowly but surely pushed upward, right? We can look at it basically, by multiple different metrics, right? Obviously, this gargantuan spike is COVID, right, right. But then, housing subsidies, we can look at that. There's giant housing subsidies, and in the late '80s, and which is hilarious. Giant subsidies under the Reagan administration for housing. Unemployment benefits, again, you can see the pandemic, et cetera. But there is no, Medicaid. This is the big one that I was talking about, right? This is the real big one. Medicaid and government health care, right? This is the one that is ballooning out of control. So under most things, you see a gradual increase and or steady. And of course, under Medicaid, you see ballooning percent of GDP, right? Like we're now at over 5% of our entire GDP is spent on just this, right? Like that's a problem. That's a huge problem. So I do want to say just for a little bit, you know, I don't, this idea that like Republicans have had this strong influence in like getting rid of welfare. Yeah, just the data doesn't board out. They may be vehemently against it, right? And that's, you know, at least in name, but but again, politicians lie, and when they're in power, they don't do anything to actually reduce welfare, right? Or reduce spending. It's lip service to people, to, you know, white working class people. Like, we're going to get rid of welfare and we're going to get those, you know, what's that racist term for, I can't think of the name.
Welfare queens or Cadillac?
Yeah, welfare. Yeah, we're going to get rid of the welfare queens, et cetera, et cetera. And then they don't, right? Like they don't, because they'll lose votes and they'll lose power and they'll lose control. The problem has to remain in order for them to sell you a solution, right? So yeah, I don't buy that necessarily. And I do think you, as you correctly pointed out, it's, there's a reason that conservatives give more to charity, than the left do. And there's a reason that they're more involved in their community, et cetera. It's, you know, and so on and so forth. Part of it's Christian faith. But part of it is that when you feel that individualism, you have an obligation. And again, these are people with 50, 60%. I have a video, you might want to check out. You might not want to check out. I don't care. It's called the Richmond Trade Association. It's an old video. My theory's not great on it compared to where my theory is now. I think I might even have still been a fucking minarchist at the time, if I think about it. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Bitch. Here we go. From 2 years ago. Right. There are for-profit models of charity. And this is an example of how a for-profit model for charity can work very, very well and be beneficial to all of the businesses that cater to it, where everyone makes a profit because of charity. Because people will pay for things that they want, right? And so the basic concept is very simple. I start a charity and I go to businesses and I say, I want membership dues. And if you pay membership dues, you get to put this thing in your window. And I got a donation from somebody that runs the local soup kitchen. And you get to advertise your product as one of the people that support one of the good guys. And then you grow that business model to, we're going to do a folk festival and an event, and we're going to take donations for the charity, and we're going to take donations for the local soup kitchen, et cetera. And you repeat it, and then you sell specific access to those things to members, right? So now all of a sudden, people like feeling good. That's psychic profit again. Why is it that women will not work an entire fucking job to stay home with their kids? Because they have psychic profit. It's the same thing. Rich people especially, they want to buy shit and feel like they're one of the good guys for buying the thing. There are for-profit ways, absolutely, to solving problems and engaging in charity. And the market has to be better at it than government because of the economic calculation problem. It is mathematically not possible that the government is more skilled when they're not engaged in price.
And
if people value it, they'll pay for it. And if they don't, then you have a fucked up, corrupt society, and you should work on fixing your society.
You an ANCAP yet, Prime?
Absolutely fucking not. Well, sorry.
After all that, and you not, goddamn.
Well, again, because our starting.
I appreciate you listening. It's fine.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate you sharing. I think it's really valuable. I said it was the other week that I just because we talked for so long, so long, I can become more sympathetic to your arguments, right? And you guys, both of you, have shifted me on things in the past, right? Absolutely. I don't think I'd be an honest actor if that didn't happen, you know. But
Don't tell the
in the
lefties.
end,
They always knew you were a class traitor.
oh my god, they think I'm a fucking grifter. Apparently, it's incredible. Like how?
It's the worst fucking
Why?
grift.
Awful grift. Awful grift. Please come on. But where was I going with this? Like uh, charity relies on people, on individuals valuing these things, right? A private
Yes.
individual seeing something and valuing it, and to taking action, and then of course being able to raise the funds to take action. And but we'll take it on faith that your system of for-profit charity
What
would
you agree?
work.
What I'm saying is, if people value something, then they're willing to pay for the thing that they value. It's the capitalist that is incentivized to figure like the capitalist is incentivized by profit to find a way to get to make money off of things people value. They are deeply incentivized to figure out you have something that you value, how can I make money off of it?
And
Whereas the government doesn't have that incentive
yeah, I don't because
or the information.
but even then, because all right, this comes down to our fundamental, uh, well, one of the things this comes down to is our
Hmm.
fundamental understanding of the market, or not the market, how the government works, and how money works, and our disagreement there. I don't want to go down that road. I really don't. I really don't. That's another
It's
thing.
fine.
It's gonna be a big fight. I don't want to do it. So I'll leave that alone, right? And I'll
Hmm.
work within your system, like so even if it's the case that a for-profit charity can address like the issue of single mothers, the millions of them, I guess I don't know how many, but I imagine millions
Hmm.
of single mothers. Um, there are other issues that simply won't be valued. This is like the case of you see this on a smaller scale when we're addressing diseases, right?
Hmm.
Um, cancer, yeah, like very well funded charities. Uh, and AIDS, another one is pretty well funded, right? Um,
Hmm.
these things especially have a general non-racialized like
Yeah, cancer. I think
target.
like I think roughly a third of all cancer funding is charity, and then like 2/3 of it is government. Right. So if
Yeah.
you got rid of the government, then you'd instantaneously obviously lose 2/3 of your funding, but also if you got rid of the government, people would have a fuck ton more money. So if they had a fuck ton more money, the
Mm,
idea that
my
people would
no,
probably
my
pay
point.
more, but yeah.
You know, but you understand my point where I'm going with it, right? That
Hmm.
different diseases or
Hmm.
conditions get different amounts of charity, right?
Yeah.
Even
People
if
value some over another because they've heard
it
about it or they lost a
yeah,
family member to it,
if
etc.
they heard about it, if they lost a family member, and if it affects the people that they are sympathetic to,
Hmm.
right? So there are diseases that affect ethnic groups, right? Certain ethnic groups,
Yeah.
and they get less.
Yeah.
Simply the case. Like in
Or
terms of
more,
real
right? Like
numbers
like
of
Jews
affected,
spend a lot of money trying to figure out Tay Sachs disease because it's a
yeah,
uniquely Ashkenazi, well, not uniquely Ashkenazi, but it affects them heavily.
yeah. So if you in real numbers, two diseases can be equal, but because of its target audience, right? Like those diseases will get different amounts of money coming in through different charities, right?
Hmm.
Is that the way that we should allocate our resources? Just because one is seen as more worthy when the other one has affects an equal number of people? Should that be the case, or the fact that the people that it targets maybe don't have a lot of economic power to start with, and so they don't have a lot of money to gift with or without the government existing? You know,
Hmm.
should that be the case, or can we have a government that steps in and says, "Well, this is all valuable, and we can help subsidize this funding as well"? Research that otherwise wouldn't happen. And so, and you can again extrapolate this to the larger charity infrastructure, and say that like, uh, sure, people care about single mothers generally, right? But
Hmm.
do they care about like black queer homeless teens? Do they? Some people do. I care about them, right?
Hmm.
But is there enough to tackle that problem?
So, I mean, there's a couple of things in here, right? So the thing is that there's
Real quick, before you answer, I gotta get up really early tomorrow morning, so really appreciate you guys. But
Yeah,
I'll probably answer this and
Cheers,
then
later.
dip out as
have
well.
a good
Yeah.
one, friend.
Good night, brother.
Good night. Good night.
So there's a couple of inherent assumptions that you keep making, which is fine, right? Maybe you're not really thinking about it, but when you say this has value, it has value to you, right? And probably to a large group of people, but it doesn't have value to other people. And so setting aside, because I know that you're trying to engage in my economic system, right? So I won't dig into the idea of like the morality of like imposing your values on other people's values, right?
Uh-huh.
Purely economics, right? Because like I would obviously make that moral argument that that's wrong, right?
Sure.
But from a pure economic perspective, is like, well, why do people not care about black LGBTQ homeless people? Is it racism? Potentially. Is it bigotry against the LGBTQ community? Potentially. It also might just be that black people are 13% of the population and like LGBTQ people are somewhere between 40% if you're in California and magically like 4% if you're in Ohio, but whatever, you know what I mean? Like you're talking about something that is, and then when you talk about homeless teens, right?
Mhm.
There's that. And then there is, the idea that like these are runaway kids because of like abusive families, right? I think what you're talking about is yes, less people will value that because less people are affected by it. And because less people are affected by it, right? It will have less value, but it will also, there's also a correlation, obviously not a 1-to-1, but there's going to be a kind of a correlation that like things that affect way less people, right? Probably take less money to tackle as challenges, right? If we're talking about the example of like, how do we clothe, feed, and help LGBTQ runaway black kids versus how do we deal with single moms, right? Like obviously single moms is going to be a way bigger, fucking more expensive problem than like that, right? And so like when you say, well, this has equal value or that has equal, or like disease A and disease B are just as dangerous, but everyone's can focus on disease B because it's popular and nobody's focused on disease A because it's not as spicy, et cetera, et cetera. Again, the market is really complex. And so we have to start from first principles. And if you deny those first principles, it becomes really difficult to explain how those things work. So one of the first principles that I keep saying, right, is like value is subjective, right? That like what you value, others don't value. And that changes throughout the day, throughout time of day, because of environmental factors in your life, et cetera. Right. And so the thing is that like when the market is made up of all these things, it's like you might not care about disease A, but the experts do. Because the experts know disease A is just as much of a problem as disease B. And the experts also know that disease A is like underfunded, et cetera. Right. And so then it becomes the challenge. So the experts, the people that do this work, they feel like, oh man, we really got to work on disease A. So there's a value there. There's a value in your employees and your workforce. And then there's a value too in that information because people aren't aware of that information. There's all of these things that actually do have value selling the idea that disease A is more important, et cetera. And so like there's an assumption made about how the market works that I think kind of tends to oversimplify how the market works as opposed to understanding that the first principles, which is that if there is value in something like you believe there is, then it is the capitalist's job to make profit off of that value, or for people to come together for community and mutual aid to solve problems that have value that gain them psychic profit, even if it doesn't necessarily give them them individually profit from a business, and both can be done simultaneously.
But um, look. I understand like the uh, like what you're saying, what you're putting forth here, right?
Mm-hmm.
I understand like the underlying principles that like this is based on and how that like builds up to your conclusions here. Um and I am trying to apply what you're saying to real life. Um
Mm-hmm.
so I'll ask you this then. Um AIDS in particular, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um Now AIDS is something that's generally uh, seen as a big issue and a worthwhile cause.
Mm-hmm.
But when AIDS was just seen wrongly as being a gay disease
Mm-hmm.
and a gay problem and an act of God, right? Um, there was no value despite the number of people it was affecting, right?
Mm.
That bigotry, I guess, maybe this
Yeah,
is
bigotry has a
wrong to
cost in
say,
the
but
market.
like this distorts the market. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Um,
Bigotry has a cost in the market, right? Like, so I'm developing a sociological theory called cultural cost theory, and yeah, where I basically combine sociology and economics, to create a new
I love
sociological
that you're
lens.
doing that. Just shout out to you. No, seriously, I think it's really cool that you're doing that.
I don't know when I'm ever like it's never it's like my baby, so like it's like so like I don't know, I want to release it, but I never feel ready to. Um,
Yeah.
but like in the way that I view these things is that you're absolutely right, right? So when I look at cultural cost theory, I look at things from that perspective, which I can't blame you for not knowing something that only I know about. um, right. So like from a structural functionalist position, institutions remain stable, right? So let's say you have a law firm, and um, the law firm is a New York law firm that is mostly New York lawyers, and that's a lot of Jewish people, right?
Uh-huh.
A lot of people that are like, got the job because of nepotism, right? So there's a culture.
Don't worry,
that
I'm not
exists.
recording.
I am. I don't care.
Okay.
I'm always recording.
All right.
I don't care. Right. But it's just, it doesn't matter, right? Like they got the
Yeah.
job because their family was working in it. Right. And let's say they do whatever type of law they do, it doesn't matter. Right.
Mhm.
And so they have a certain in-group preference, right? And that in-group preference can either be strong or it can be weak. And liberals in America are the only group in Western society. Western liberals are the only group that has been demonstrated that we know of, really, that has an out-group preference. Most races and people have an in-group preference. So, blacks have the strongest in-group preference in America, followed by Asians, then Native Americans, then Hispanics, then conservative whites. Conservative whites have the least in-group preference of all races in America. And then liberal whites actually have an out-group preference, right? Like they actually prefer black businesses as opposed to white businesses, or et cetera, right? So there's this in-group preference in this institution, right? And, one of the hiring managers, he hears about this Mississippi hotshot lawyer, a black guy from Mississippi that does their type of law, and he's fucking amazing. He kills, right? Now, when he gets to, and so they want to hire him. Now, when he gets there, he's going to be met with bigotry and racism, right? Because he's different. It might not even be that he's because he's black. He'll see it because he's black, probably, right? But it'll be subtle things. One of the things he might not think about is the fact that he's still wearing those Mississippi church suits, those overly big suits. And he shows up there and everyone's like, who the fuck is this guy? He looks ridiculous. He looks like a fucking clown, because these are all New York lawyers, right? They have slim fit suits, right? Maybe because it's, it's hot down in the South, right? And his suits are, the silk doesn't go all the way down. Well, that's seen in New York hotshot law firm as poverty and, and low class. But in the deep South, that's just the legs got to breathe. It's fucking hot down there, right? He's from a podunk. He's got an accent that makes it difficult for people to understand him, right? And because of that, they don't want to communicate with him as much. They're annoyed by it, etc. The stronger the in-group preference, the more likely they are to not utilize this amazing black lawyer, right? So the more racist or the more whatever, all these other different, they have all these different cultural things that clash, come together. The more likely they are to dismiss him. At the same time, it's functional. That law firm has existed for 250 years. Be it racism, be it a certain type of person that you want to have in there, be it a certain way that you carry yourself. Maybe that black man does great in Mississippi, but he doesn't do so good when he's in front of a New York judge that isn't taking his fucking antics seriously. So there's all these different confounding variables. And what ends up occurring is that he's either more successful than the in-group preference or he's less successful than the in-group preference. There's a supply and demand equation, and there's a price point. And that price point is he's got to be this successful to beat their racism or their cultural preferences, etc. And so that is kind of how I view many things from that is a very, very like 1,000-foot view of the micro of cultural cost theory as I imagine it. Is that we have to understand that racism plays a key, sure, but people are overly focused on racism and they don't think about other things. Another example, real quick, I'll be quick, I promise, is sentencing, right? A lot of times people think that blacks are sentenced because judges are racist. That might be true. But one of the things that they found is that one of the explanatory factors is the way that they dress. The judge has a certain cultural bias that he doesn't even know. And it's not necessarily the skin color of the person in front of him. It's that the white kid showed up in fucking slacks and he showed up in like a polo because he didn't own a button-up suit and he tucked his shirt in. And the black guy showed up in baggy jeans or something. And like it was a lack of cultural knowledge on the defendant's part, but it's also a lack of cultural understanding from the judge's part to realize that bias is playing in, that he's not recognizing that like that black guy is just the same as that white kid, because in his mind he's like, this white kid respects the court and this black guy shows up in these fucking, like, you don't respect it, you're just another one of these thugs. And before you know it, the racism mixes in with dress and attire and all of these other little cultural factors that we don't realize play a part in our differences and how we have difficulty seeing each other. And at the same time, institutions that have no preferences crumble because they'll let anybody come in. They have no, they're not gatekept. If that law firm let anybody come in and like just become the CEO of the law firm, they'd come in with wild, crazy ideas that don't necessarily work and they'd run the business into the ground. There's a culture there. And that culture, it might not even be racist at all, but that culture says, this is how we do things. If you want to be one of us, you either play ball and become more like us, or you prove you're so fucking good that our ways are dumb and backwards and need to be changed. And there's a push-pull there.
And you can understand though that like even if it's not like based off race, that it can have
it's based off corollaries with race, and so like it feels the same. It feels the same. Like you know, like my people are treated this way, these people aren't. It looks like this person's racist, but it's just a bias and a lack of understanding.
This may affect exactly how we deal with the cause, but we understand that there is still this harm and that needs to be addressed.
But the harm might not actually be bad, right? It might actually be important for that law firm to survive.
Yeah.
That they don't just take a Mississippi hotshot lawyer and jettison him up to the top, that he's got to be like them.
I hear you. Okay, so how do you map this on to the AIDS conversation, right? So we got this pandemic that targets an underclass,
right,
and a lot of them, and now it's not just targeting them; it's also hitting other people. But because of a bigotry, people don't even want to say it, right? To like Rock Hudson, like
AIDS is. It's a lot of bigotry, but also AIDS is kind of special because HIV and AIDS aren't the same thing, and it's not
Yeah.
necessarily an exact progressive disease. It's based off of risk factors. So you have white people in nice neighborhoods that don't do drugs, right, and aren't engaged in and have healthy diets, where they carry the HIV virus, but they're not developing AIDS the same way other people that are high risk. And so
Mm.
it was really easy for people to point the finger at people that were poor, people that were engaged in high risk behavior like needle sharing and things like that, as a means of like, you deserve this disease. So AIDS is kind of a unique thing in that way, and that it really helped play into the bigotry. And so
Yeah.
so looking at it from like a cultural cost theory perspective, as kind of I was always putting, is that there was a cost to our bigotry, right? Our lack of openness hurt us as a collective, because we allowed a disease to spread rampantly and kill people, even people that were within our group, right? Whoever our group is, right? Like I'm taking
Mhm.
on the they right now, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like, right, because we had our bigotry was high enough that we ignored dangers that we shouldn't have ignored, and if our bigotry was lower, we would not have had the same harm. And so in a way, this is kind of an economic punishment towards those. Obviously, we're talking about people's lives, etc.
Mhm.
You know, I would also point out in terms of the AIDS epidemic and things like that, you know, obviously being the ANCAP that I am, that there was an example of a market solution that was forced into the gray market. And that was, you know, famous movie about it, Dallas Buyers Club, right? So there,
Mm.
people desired it. And even though it was illegal, they were willing to pay for it, and they were willing to smuggle shit because they were fucking dying. And it was the
Mm.
government that stopped them. It was the government that was poisoning gay people with AZT and pumping fucking cancer into their veins. And that government did the same thing to black children in New York in the 2000s, pumping children that did not have HIV or AIDS as lab rats because they were fucking orphans and nobody gave a fuck about them, and made them part of AZT drug trials. That was happening in the early 2000s when you and I were
Oh,
both
that sounds a
alive.
little familiar. Yeah, I think I've heard a little bit about that. Okay.
And nobody
Yeah.
gave a fuck because they're orphans, because they're black New York orphan kids, right? And
Yeah.
again, that plays a role in how we feel about those things. So, like, I do agree that there's an economic cost to bigotry, right? But I think the economic cost to bigotry in a market, and this is something Thomas Sowell's very famous for saying, right? Is that like, racism without government power is just like, I think it's like, I'm butchering the quote, but it's like, it's just bad economics, right? It's bad business, right? It's like, if I refuse to hire 13% of the population, well, guess what? I'm losing out on good candidates. I'm losing money.
Uh,
I'm
yeah, I
losing money that my
agree.
competitor's not.
If you allow those competitors to exist, right? Like, hey, I'm gonna, Scott, you being the horrible person you are, you
Mhm.
have a whites only lunch counter, right? Um, and I come to your town. I want to go to your lunch counter. You tell me to get the fuck out, right? Okay, so
Right.
I guess I'll go to the
Sundown
friendly,
town. Yeah.
yeah, right. Um, so you tell me to get out of the town, but also like there might not be a place, a lunch counter that accepts black people because you and the boys have gotten together to make sure that everyone follows the rules, right? Like
Yeah. I mean, you
it's
probably
like
don't want to
those.
go to that town.
Yeah, I agree, but like. But now I live in a 1940s America, and I don't have much choice as to places where I can go, right? There were black
Mhm.
businesses that tried to rise up, but they got burnt down. Like these distortions happen all the time, and that's just called humans being humans.
Do you
That's
think
society.
Do
Sorry,
you
go ahead.
think do you think that people would become more racist if they were free to economically be racist? Or do you think instead that those racists already exist in our society, and you're going to their businesses right now and giving them money and you don't even know it?
I see what you're saying. Um, I. Hmm. As a black person, I have to
Mhm.
understand that people are just going to hate me, right? There's a certain number of people. Now, I don't believe everyone, obviously, right? I'm not.
As a white man, it's the same thing, right? You know what I mean?
Okay.
We
I just,
they're called college campuses. You know what I mean? Like,
but
well,
yeah,
also black people are just more racist than white people, right? Like that's obvious. Like they are.
But I,
They have,
I
you know, not a lot of black businesses in my area. I'm okay. You know what I mean? I'm doing all right. But yeah,
oh, there's so many things to respond to, but I have to leave it alone. I have to.
it's
But
okay.
there's a certain number of people who are going to dislike me.
Mhm.
That are going to have racial prejudices to me, and some of them are going to be better at hiding it than others, right?
Mhm.
And along my life, I am probably most definitely in the past and will again in the future enrich those individuals. I'm okay with that, right? I'm okay
Mhm.
as long as I get the services I need that can continue on to have a happy, fulfilled life and in a safe manner. Not get my ass
Right.
kicked. If I can accomplish that, that's enough. Yeah, like list of there's a whole list of brands I'm sure that I've bought that
Mhm.
with CEOs at the top, right? With a C-suites at the top that fucking despise black people. Yeah, it sucks. And if I find them, I mean, I guess I can boycott them, whatever, right?
I
But
mean,
like,
probably not a lot, right? Like if you're in the C-suite and you despise black people, like that's super fucking competitive at the higher
I
echelons, right? So like,
mean, there's
and it's
fucking
gonna
what's
hurt
his
you.
name, Papa John's, right?
Well, he was being anti-racist when he said the N-word.
um, um,
He was
uh,
quoting another person and was calling out racists.
Papa John's and literally everything he's done, including his. Okay, sorry,
I'm
I'm
just
gonna.
saying that's what
It's
happened.
fine.
Like he was.
I'm not gonna go down there. All right, it's fine.
I
Well, I'm
mean,
talking
was
about
it
some
dumb for him to actually say it? And does it like maybe point to the fact that like dude's got some backwards fucking thinking? Yeah, for sure. But he was being anti-racist.
I'm gonna leave that alone. We'll have to talk about it some other day, friend.
Dude, look it up.
But
You'll be like, what?
I remember that. It's anyway.
All right.
So the point is that like
Mhm.
that's fine, but like if we give them simply the freedom to do so, and that's the Jim Crow South when they had the freedom to do so, then black people
No,
suffer. Black people just don't get those services. They
that's
can
not
try
Jim
to
Crow.
replace those services themselves, but even then, there's still a distortion of like what suppliers are allowed to access, right? What
Mhm.
spaces like the business is allowed to be in, and all these other things that all make everything more difficult.
So, just quick correction. That's not the Jim Crow South. Because under the Jim Crow South, it was illegal for businesses to accept black people and white people together too. Right? So it was the government forced segregation on businesses. There were plenty of business owners
I
that
see.
wanted to have black people. There was not like a competition where like black people and white people could go to a bar across the street and gather together and like have a good time and be like, fuck you,
Fair
racist,
enough.
across the road. It was like, I own a bar. I have to
That's
either
fair.
have it whites only or blacks only. And if I
That's
have it
fair.
as blacks only, I'm singled out and the KKK gets to come in and throw Molotov cocktails in my bar or something.
Yeah, but
And
we
no one's,
saw
and half of them are going to be the police, right?
that racism in the North as well, right? So and black people escaped the Jim Crow South. It's not like they found utopia in the North, right?
No, of course not. No.
Yeah,
I mean, it's probably a little worse in the South, obviously. The history of slavery, hair invoked
yeah.
democracy is what
We had
nevertheless,
race riots everywhere. Race riots
yeah.
of like little pogroms against black people
I,
happen
so,
across
so,
the country.
but again, all the way back to my original question on this,
Yeah.
do you think if we had that, if it was more out in the open, I'm just curious. I don't know what the data actually says about it, so I don't actually know.
Mm.
Would there be more racism because it's normalized out in the open, or would the racists be more punished? And I intuit it's the latter. I intuit that you when someone says no N words at their shop, a whole lot of people that might have shopped there, including black people, are not going to shop there. And I don't think you're going to have a large market of people that are like, "Ooh, that's my guy. I got to
Mm,
always get my sandwiches
But
from him."
there's another access here, right? And
Hmm.
that like uh the intervention of government changes people's mores, right? Like mores is what the word I'm looking for. Whatever. Um,
It works well enough. It's fine.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it changes people's attitudes, and for better or for worse, as you pointed out, right? Um,
Hmm.
and the massive push by the government, uh massive, but the push by the government to stop these practices out help shape people's attitudes altogether, right? There are a certain cohort of people who would be like racist, like they'd be like not accidental, incidental
Hmm.
racist otherwise, right? Where they'd have a level of bigotry just because in society that's what is normalized, that's just like what they see around, and they put no thought into it, and so they just kind of go along with it, right? That they'll participate in it, even if
Yeah.
they don't feel any like racial animus, they'll still do it. That's just a thing that happens. We
I
saw
think
it
the
with
opposite can be true too, though. I don't know which one wins, right? Like, I do agree with you that, like, government in government. So there's another theory in sociology. It's known as systems theory, sometimes open systems theory. And the basic idea behind it is the people, and there are people, and then there are institutions. This is super like simplistic way of looking at it, because it's like
Mhm.
it's mostly French people that are into this shit. But so there's institutions, and then there's people, and the idea is that people influence institutions, and institutions influence people, right? So
Yeah,
it's like the Catholic Church, for example, in like a town. It's like, well, the Catholic Church might influence people in the town to be, as more and more Mexican Latino immigrants come in, they might influence the people to be like, nah, fuck these people, right? You know what I mean? Like,
mhm,
right, right.
mhm,
And then the white only fucking Catholic Church like does the same thing, and they start feeding off of each other, and it becomes like a runaway train sometimes, where the
mhm,
institution and the people become an amorphous blob. Now, obviously, what has occurred is usually the opposite, right? Catholic churches, um, a big part of their money and donations, and a
mhm,
big part of their congregation are Latinos. They're,
mhm.
Latinos are very Catholic, and so they come in and they're like, your pastor that you knew since you were a kid was like, welcome Sister Garcia. And people are like, oh, I don't know if I'm about this, right? But the institution's putting pressure on them, right? And then the influx of immigrants puts more pressure on the institution, and it might
Yeah.
kick people out, or it might make people less racist because of it. So, like, yeah, I absolutely agree that the institution can do that. I would only counter by saying that the opposite is also true, right? Like in another great example from the Bible, right, is, when talking about Exodus, right? He says, God says over and over again, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, right? It's like, when you ask for your freedom, it's going to piss him off even more. And it's guaranteed he's not going to let you go. Like, we're going to ask, but like, nothing is going to make him angrier than your demand for freedom. And he's going to hate you and be violent towards you and beat you all the more worse because you demanded your freedom. And we're going to, like, you think it's bad now when you were good little Jews, or, go back to civil rights era, when you were good little darkies and you knew your place, everything was fine. But now you want to demand that you're my equal?
Mhm,
Oh, I will fuck you up for that. So, as
mhm,
much as that push probably created a push away from racism, it almost certainly had an opposite effect on other people too. People that were only a little racist, that were like, that were okay so long as the status quo was that. But now I got to compete with these Negroes at my job. Oh, now I'm angry. Now I hate these people. 'Cause it's hard to know which has more of an effect. We don't know.
yeah.
It's predicting the future.
Yeah, fair enough. But like, uh, I'm just going to always default to protecting individuals in this situation, right? There's a group where the large society is being cruel to, and not for any particular good reason. maybe need to be cool to like child rapists, right? But
Right.
there's a group that uh, that needs protection. I'm going to protect them, not like hope that if we left that system alone, it would work itself out. That like eventually people would there would be an economic cost
Yeah.
to
No, I agree.
excluding these individuals that would change attitudes over time at some point. Especially when I know that people respond to all kinds of other incentives, not just their economics.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Well, that was kind of that was my own argument with pregnant
Yeah,
with women, right?
yeah.
I don't necessarily disagree with you. My problem is what does protection mean, right? And so it's like it's easy for us to force people to behave in the way that we kind of know is the right way to behave, right? And but the problem is like again, we don't know the future, so we don't know if that actually helped or not. It could have been the worst thing we could have done. It could be that the reason we still deal with racism today is that very reason. It's because we created resentment and we bred things by forcing people into a certain way. There are a lot of people. There's an instinct. So Robert Bellah makes this argument in his book, A Theory of Human Religion, Evolution and Theory of Evolution in Human Religion. That's it. Evolution in Human Religion from the Paleolithic to the Axial Age. He makes an argument that human beings at our core, before societies ever formed, before religion formed, we have like three distinct things as a mammal species that no one else has all three of. No other mammal has. One is paternal care and maternal care, both, right? Most mammalian species either have paternal care, like bonobos, or they have maternal care, right? The women take care of the children. And humans are this rare breed where both moms and dads, at least for 4 years, take care of the children. And then there is the disposition to dominate, which is that we have a certain disposition to compete and want to be better and to control other people. And the inverse of that is that we have a disposition to resent domination. We have a core part of our humanity is when we're told do it this way, we go, fuck you, I'll do it my way. And so it's deep at our core of who we are as people. It's why we yearn for freedom, is that same instinct. We yearn for liberty. We accept that we need a top chimpanzee at the top of the troop that sits at the top of the hill and tells us what all to do. And at the same time, we always look at him and we go, I'm going to be up there one day. And I hate that he's there because he's over me. How fucking dare he think he has a right to tell me what to do? And so when the government forces things like that, I think it hardens Pharaoh's heart.
So here's the thing, like I don't know. This might seem like more of an attack than I mean it to be, but what's difficult when discussing these things with you is that like not I don't want to say excuse, but like your retort inevitably will go back to, well, the government is distorting everything, right? Like distorting the market, distorting
Yeah, I mean,
society in some way.
it's my worldview, obviously.
I understand. I understand. And this is why I don't want to make this sound like an attack, right? But it
Mhm.
makes it difficult to mm, like go down these experiments with like thought experiments with you, because if that's always the case, then like, well, I can't extract the government from my analysis to like isolate, just like you said with economics, you can't isolate all these things, right? So I can't pull that
Mhm.
out. So like I'm thinking of the example of slavery in
Mhm.
Americas. And from my understanding, from what I'm hearing from authors like who looked into this, is that early on there was an apologetic view to being a slave master, and that like this was a necessary evil.
Mhm.
That this was
Yes.
like only until a certain amount of economic development or something, and then we got to get rid of this because what we're doing is just it's just too much,
Yeah.
right?
There's tons
You
of
can see,
evidence to suggest that. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, and you can see that
when the
in
founding
this
fathers
day.
ratified the Constitution, even they banned the transatlantic slave trade like 20 afters after.
Exactly.
Like,
But then
banning slavery was kind of part of our foundational constitution. Like,
But then the
enough.
cotton gin happened, right?
Mhm.
Then the market happened, and the institution of slavery became far more, far more profitable. And all of a sudden, those when you look through the documents of slave masters, it's like, whoa, God gave us the right over these other lesser species or whatever the fuck,
Like
right?
the famous King Cotton speech too, right? Like, how dare you attack King Cotton?
Oh wow, I haven't heard of that one.
You never read the
That
King
sounds like-
Cotton speech?
I haven't.
It is.
I-
It's an incredible. It's a pivotal speech in the Southerners' argumentation just before the
gotta
Civil
read
War.
this. King Cotton
Called
speech. Okay,
King
I'll take a
Cotton,
look at
yeah.
that.
From a senator, I believe. Yeah.
But you understand what I'm saying here, right? Once
Mhm.
the money came in, the market dictated that this seems necessary now. This seems extremely necessary, and we'll come up all kinds of ways to excuses, right? Well, these black people, they can't possibly be left on their own, they'll practically die out without the direction of the white man, and it goes on and on. So like that's like an example of the market making things worse, right? Bending history towards injustice, because people have incentives.
Yeah, of course, people have incentives. Market incentives, of course, have an effect on all kinds of bad things, right? Like, I wouldn't say the all evil is government, right? There are evil things that occur all on their own without the government needing to be involved, right? So in the case of slavery in the Americas, is, you make an interesting point because it's special, right? American slavery is something like the world has never seen before or after. You know what I mean? We had less than 4% of the transatlantic slave trade, and yet our slave trade became within the states larger than the entirety of the transatlantic slave trade. How? Because we bred them intentionally, like cattle, in a way that, well, I say them. I mean, I know you're black, you know what I mean? Well, you're Haitian, aren't you? Haitian.
Yeah, it's not me, yeah.
So it's not what we were doing. I mean, you guys were just getting killed, right? It was just like, work them till they die, and then So there's that, right? So that's one element that's really interesting about it. The other element is that slavery has always existed, right? Slavery existed. No culture had such a short span of slavery than the American colonies. It's the shortest period of slavery, enslavement, than in almost anywhere in the world, right? Almost everywhere in the world, what happened is you enslaved your weaker neighbors for a very, very long time. And the reason slavery left wasn't a moral fight. It was because as your neighbors got nation states and they developed armies, it became basically impossible to just do like a slave raid, right? And so like you risked war with France, right? Like you couldn't just do like a slave raid. And colonialism had, some effect in creating slavery, but even in India, like it didn't last very long. In South Africa, you had the same thing. Obviously in the West Indies, it was a little bit worse. It lasted a little bit longer, but in most of these places, slavery as an institution, it didn't last very long. And, white people couldn't, until the very end of the transatlantic slave trade, they couldn't go inland into Africa. It was basically impossible, right? So they had to purchase. And so again, there's this whole other element of selling weapons to create tribes that are now running slave empires with advanced weapons and money and things like that. Obviously, the Muslims' slave trade during the exact same time was twice the size of the entire transatlantic slave trade, and continued long after, until America put an end to it. Thomas Jefferson stopped the slave trade with the Barbary Wars. Hilariously enough, didn't free like three of his kids, but he could stop it there. But regardless, because they were kidnapping white people. We're being honest, right? So American slavery in the South, it was a totally different thing. And so that's why I mentioned earlier, Herrenvolk democracy. Herrenvolk democracy is a concept. Have you heard of it? Okay, so it's a concept of governance, right? Which basically was this: in the North, there was a burgeoning middle class, especially as the Industrial Revolution was occurring. But in the South, there was basically two types of people, minus the slaves. There was the yeoman farmers, and then there was the aristocracy. And so, how do you keep the yeoman farmers from rising up against the aristocracy? Because the yeoman farmers were pushed to the edge of like trade routes. They were given they were indentured servitudes that like made it out alive, and then they were given the shittiest land that they were promised instead of the good land. And then there was monopolies were run by the aristocracy. They monopolized the trade routes that basically said, you don't get to sell your tobacco on the trade route. You sell your tobacco to me at cost, and then I sell your tobacco for however much I want to with the rest of my batch. And so these people they maintained siphoning and stealing from these people by creating a government that kept white people. The majority of the Southern whites were horribly oppressed by an aristocracy that was stealing from them, exploiting from them, and doing all kinds of. So how do you keep that in check? Well, you're not black. You're not like the darkies. Those people are stupid mongrels. You're one of the good whites. And if you just keep working hard, maybe you'll be able to come into our society one day. I mean, fucking barely anybody ever made it there, but they utilized racism as a form of governance to keep poor whites in check. And so the government itself bred racism, the government, right? But it's the aristocracy, right? Like it's the wealthy landed gentry were breeding racism as much as they could into people. And so there's a lot of, it's part of its lost cause, I know you know what the lost cause is. Part of it's lost cause. But like a lot of it is true that it's hard to know how racist the South really was and how much slavery really was super, super important. I think to the poor whites, it was all about slavery. I think they wanted I think to the poor whites, it was all about keeping black people enslaved. But to the landed gentry, I think it was about taxation. I think it was about tariffs and the fact that they were paying massive amounts of taxes compared to the North because they were taxing they were taxing imported goods, and the North is manufacturing goods. So they're not hit by these import taxes, but the South is exporting raw materials. And so they're hit by these import taxes. And so the form of taxation that they're doing is destroying and crippling the Southern economy at a time where the North is doing corrupt railroad deals, and the politicians are all the same people that own all the corporations up there, and the South has no representation in Congress anymore, only in the Senate, and they're powerless to stop the North from taxing in ways that disproportionately hurts. There's a reason Fort Sumter was the fucking beginning of it all, because Fort Sumter is where they collected all the fucking import taxes from England. That's the reason that fucking fort existed. It was to fucking make sure all the British, when they came in, knew to play ball and pay all their taxes before they came in. And so, like, with the introduction of the cotton gin, I think what you had is you had a South that was primed in a way that no other culture in history was primed to be able to, like, in a way that I don't even think the aristocracy like were prepared for, in such a way that they had sown racism intentionally as a form of chattel slavery in a way that was very different than how racism or than how slavery was done in Europe and in all these other places. And so when the cotton gin gave them an economic value, and yet a deeply racist place, you had that. And then of course you had economic pressures of a burgeoning aristocracy that also felt that they were in competition with the North as much as they were trying to grow in other places. So I agree that market pressures for sure have a role to play in things, right? I mean, in good things and bad things, right? I mean, the industrial, there's crazy things that happen. For example, one of the reasons for the creation of the Magna Carta, which is like the beginning instantiation of rights, is almost certainly the Black Plague. The Black Plague right, wiped out most workers. So there was less workers. And because there was less workers, their labor was more valuable. Because less workers, as we've made the economic argument multiple times tonight, less workers means more competition in the workforce. And all of a sudden, they could demand certain things because they weren't easily replaceable. It wasn't a riot. It wasn't a revolution. It was a, bitch, you need us. You need us now. The industrial revolution's right around the corner, right? Like machinery is starting to be invented. Factories are starting to exist. More complex water mills are springing forward. And you've lost a giant portion of your workforce, like 2/3 of it.
What was that name? Something democracy that I didn't know previously you just explained?
Herrenvolk. I gotta Google it to make sure I spell it right. Here you go. It's in the chat.
All right. Yeah, great.
Herrenvolk, when you Google it, just says Herrenvolk democracy is a system of government in which only a specific ethnic group participates in government, while other groups are disenfranchised. Ethnocracy, in which one group dominates the state, is a related concept.
Okay, yeah, that's why I would have gone with ethnocracy. I'm like, isn't there another term to describe exactly that? Okay, all right, fair enough. But yeah, I'll look into that.
Yeah, but it's like it's not technically an ethnocracy because like there were other ethnic groups participating. It was just excluding blacks.
Just not you people. But anyway, I'll only leave it here. But like, this was a really good discussion. Like, I really enjoyed this conversation.
I'm actually glad I recorded it.
Oh yeah, great. You're gonna.
It's my new rule. I'm just fucking leave it on because sometimes interesting shit happens.
Yeah, you're gonna leave the darkies. You're gonna leave that part in. You're gonna leave that.
Dude,
that
like 80% of my shit is instantaneously demonetized. Like I'm just fucking. It doesn't fucking matter.
Okay, but fair enough. All right.
You know what I mean? It's like oh, there's another one. It is what it is.
But yeah, I love it when you and I find common ground. It always takes us a long time to do so.
It's only been 6 hours and 37 minutes.
Yeah, I love that when we can accomplish it. But like it's our friction points always seem to be the same, right? Like, and there's not much we can do about that. But like I really love being able to hear like your perspective. I think it's so valuable. So I think
I appreciate it. I always love proselytizing. It's okay.
That I know. You didn't have to tell me.
Sprinkle a little. You know what I mean? Like just sprinkle a little thing. Like, you never know when you might be like, yeah, but value is subjective. And people be like, huh? What the fuck are you saying? And some lefty will be like, the fuck did you say to me? Like, well, it makes sense, right? And then you'll be like, oh, you know what I mean? And then you'll be like, fuck, they hate me now. Scott, what did you do? It is what it is.
All right, man. I'll see you later. Have a good one. Bye.
You too. Bye.